Mentioned in the Domesday Book, the apparently sleepy Herefordshire village of Eardisland is renowned for its history, which goes back before the Saxons and the Romans to the Bronze Age. A directory of 1851 describes Eardisland as a small, pleasant village, 5 miles west of Leominster and 12 north of Hereford. The River Arrow runs through it and eventually feeds into the Wye. Characterised by its striking 18th century dovecot, its multitude of black and white houses, and a church dating back to the 12th century, Eardisland is popular with tourists who come to absorb its unique atmosphere. And over the centuries, all manner of people have earned a living and brought up generations of families in this agricultural parish. Delving beneath the surface character of the place, we discover a wealth of information, both from the evidence left on the buildings themselves and from the living testimony of long-standing inhabitants about the continuity and changes that have taken place. The River Arrow is a feature which must have originally attracted settlers, as it once provided fresh water and a source of fish, and later on the necessary power to drive mills. But the river is not always an easy neighbour to live with.
I'm very interested in rivers, and I'm very interested in the history of the settlement, and I'm quite certain that Eardisland, having been founded around the 7th century, i.e. it's about 14 or 1500 years old, we're talking about the Saxons, and we're talking about people who had to live by their own rural economy. And the river was absolutely central, and they couldn't possibly, I feel, have survived if they'd let the river run riot as we do today and come roaring through, destroying their mills, destroying their fisheries, and destroying their houses as well. When the river floods here, it really is dramatic. Very worrying too for the people who live in the houses along the riverbank here, but it's not only this area by the river that floods, it's that the water also does tend to come across the fields upstream and in at the western end of the village as well, and then we take on the appearance of a mini Venice. It's great fun for everybody except those who are unfortunate enough to actually have their houses flooded. Unfortunately, there aren't too many of those.
Yeah, I can remember 1947 floods when they were delivering bread with a boat.
I can well remember when the floods started rising. My dad, being the AA man, it was our job to go out. I used to like to go with him and place flags at either end of the village, a red flag with AA sign on and a sign that said flood. And we'd go both ends of the village. Dad would carry me as a little one to do this. Great excitement in the village, of course, because there wasn't much else like. And we would stand by then for people to get stuck in it. And it's a regular thing to be pushed out. And as time went on, as kids got bigger, of course, we would try and push cars out ourselves and hope for a tip off someone.
The village has undergone an inevitable process of social change over the centuries, in which buildings have come and gone or changed their function. 25 years ago there was a school, a post office and a garage, which in the 1930s ran a one-car taxi service. Community life centred around the parish, and most people worked within 5 miles of their homes.
Well, when I was a child and later on, there were 2 shops in the village, 2 general stores. We used to have a butcher's shop, and we used to have a baker call-in, we used to have a doctor's surgery, and they've all gone. Well, I went to school in Eardisland, but there's no longer a school. When I was there was nearly 100 pupils, but when it closed, it was down to 17, and the forecast was for 9. So that makes it, you know, it does mean that there's a lot of change in the village as regards the inhabitants, because every family was a working family with children, and now it's mostly retirement.
There were several other mills around, but there wasn't one to compare to this one. Well, when we came here, it was 3 stories high, and it was used as a very good mill. It had the largest wheel I've ever seen. It stretched from the front of the building to, right out to the back. And we used to bring corn here, down here to be ground, but unfortunately it got burnt down. And then it was converted into a house and the top story demolished.
Well, Herefordshire is absolutely packed with timber frame buildings, and I've always been passionate about buildings in general. But when I moved to Herefordshire here over 20 years ago, I was fascinated by so many very beautiful buildings, and so I set about recording them, actually measuring the interiors and working towards understanding them better. So many of these buildings are like unread documents. This particular one is very plain and gives very little away about its, or it gives nothing away about its origins. But if you look at the building opposite here, this is Knapp House. This is what the building behind me would look like if it didn't have its modern clothes on. The contents of this building, which are 15th century, are hidden behind a very blank exterior, a modern exterior. So it's only by looking carefully at the inside that you can understand what on earth is going on. Ah, Jill, can we come in? That's lovely, thanks. Well, this room is rather like the exterior. It gives very little away about its origins. What we have here is probably a 17th century fireplace, and above here these boxed-in ceiling beams give very little away. They probably hide 17th century timbers, but originally this was a very much earlier building. There would have been an open fire burning here on the ground with the smoke venting up through the roof. Well, as we walk along here, we can see one of the crux. We see a collar just here. But further along, we see the real evidence for what's going on in the building. Here we have one of the principal crux, which runs from the ground floor right up to the ridge of the roof. There's a collar just here. And then here we have arch bracing. This is all held in place with a row of pegs down here and a row of pegs along here, along the corridor. And there's a chamfer. The chamfer is the clue that this is a domestic building, or was a domestic building originally, and the whole assemblage is 15th century in date. It's very clear indication of what's going on in this building.
Another ancient building reveals the use it was constructed for inside.
Well, he was to bring the fruit in, and he was to put the fruit in there, in the channel, round the channel. Then the pony would take this big wheel round and then squash it around until it's come all in juice with the juices of apples. And then they'd take it out of here, put it onto a mat, and then they'd put a layer of fruit, another mat, another layer of fruit, another mat, until you got up to the sides. And probably two men on it, and they'd turn it around, screw it down and screw it tight, and then the juice would come around on these channels here. See these channels, little channels, and then come out into a tub there. And then they'd put into the barrels. And then it would ferment for so long, 6 months probably. And then it'd be ready for drinking.
But modern-day cider production doesn't use a pony anymore.
There's a place that you should visit in the English countryside, with birds and bees and apple trees and friendly folks beside. It's Eardisland on the Arrow. It's Eardisland that you should see. Cuckoo's calling in the trees, buzzards gliding on the breeze, homemade cakes, coffee and tea, a village steeped in history. It's Eardisland on the Arrow. It's Eardisland that you should see.
Well, I went to a sale at a farm, And there happened to be a barrel there of 18 gallons, which I didn't want the cider, but I wanted the barrel for some use, not for putting cider in, but for some other purpose. And so I bought this barrel, and as it contained cider, I didn't pour it out there and then, because I thought, well, I'd take it home and try it. And when I got it home, it was so sour, you couldn't even tempt to drink it. And so I poured it out in a field, and it was so bad that it burnt all the grass off. So imagine that if you had it down in your stomach.
Things, people say it was good in the past, but it wasn't all good, was it? You know, it wasn't that good. You think of having this gas, I can heat my house up now just touching a button. As before, you had to get kindling and wood and coal and all that. And the cooking is easy. We've got microwaves now, haven't we? And entertainment, television, radio and all the rest of it. But then looking back, I suppose it was more of a community spirit, wasn't it? And you had more get-togethers in the hall, then the pub, various dart teams and things like that, and everybody knew each other.
Within living memory, some old skills have been made redundant, but are still recalled by local residents.
I don't know. I suppose I've done it ever since I was a child with my grandmother, my mother, and my brothers and sisters, and we've all been hop picking. It's just one of the best jobs that I've ever done, I think, on the field. It was such a nice feeling. You were early in the morning, you go to the hop yard, it'd probably be a bit misty, be a few cobwebs across the vines, and it'd be quite cold, and it was just such a lovely feeling, such a quiet place. And when you have picked all the hops in your house, you move to another one, which is like another green house. It's beautiful, it really is. Some people could earn quite a lot of money. They used to go hop picking to earn the money to pay for the children's shoes and that sort of thing when they went back to school. That's what they went hop picking for, and children used to have time off school to go hop picking. Hop yards are a very happy place for me. It's, as I say, when they turned over to machines, which I suppose hop picking by hand died out more or less completely in the 60s, it was a sad day, really. I mean, I know it's more efficient and probably cheaper, but it was a sad day. And where I picked, you weren't paid, you had tokens each day when they bushelled up. You had tokens for the number of bushels you had, and then you had to go to the farm at the end of hop picking to collect your money. And you usually had a glass of sherry as well.
A local farm would allow the local village to have a row of potatoes each right up the field that belonged to you. And you looked after them, I believe, until they were ripe. And you dug them up yourself. And of course you couldn't keep them very well, so you built what is called a potato clamp, which is not done in general, I think, in lots of places, whereby they put the potatoes in the ground with straw around them and heaped it up with soil to make sort of like a tent almost, and a little chimney on the top to let it breathe, I suppose.
Well, one of the reasons we lay hedges, really, I suppose, or used to, was because it was the only way to keep the stock in the fields anyway, long before wire fences. And although we cut them now with machines, cutting them with a rotary cutter ruins the hedge to a certain extent. And it needs to be let to go up so as we can pleach it again, because you can see from the hedge behind you there's holes straight through it now, whereas now this is stock-proof.
The advantages over a fence would be purely shelter, really. Generally, you only leave something that is going to be a tree, an oak, an ash.
Years ago, they used to do them every 10 to 15 years. Try and bring the outside pleachers into the edge first. And then when you've got the outside ones in there, this side and that side, you take the centre ones up to tie them back down again.
A lot of hedging's done now because there are payments made to do it. Countryside stewardship schemes, that sort of thing. Otherwise, a lot wouldn't be done.
Yeah, it's better than just cutting it off and putting a wire fence up.
I think a lot of families kept a pig, and they were quite cheap to run because you use all the scraps, the potato peelings, used to boil it up in a copper to make it palatable, and you bought bran or something for them, and that augmented it. And we kept a pig, and a lot of other people did, and when you killed the pig, you gave your neighbours joints and bits of bacon, and that was reciprocal. Everybody else did the same, so we were all right, plenty of fat meat it was then.
They used to reckon if you could plough an acre a day with a horse, that was about as much as you would do. They do that now before breakfast. It has altered now, tremendous. And a good job in a way too, because it was hard work on those horses. Middle of the summer, sweating, flies.
Yes, well, we used to go over the road to get our milk from the home farm, and I always remember Mrs. Weir with her head in the side of the cow milking away. You say, "Hello, Mrs. Weir," and she said, "Hello, young John." And she just squirted a little bit like that, and she was deadly accurate right across there and straight into the face as you went in. And it did put me off milk a bit, and I had never drank much since. If it had been beer, it might have been a different thing. Yeah.
One notable building is evidence of when John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, rode through the area on his horse in his efforts to convert the Welsh.
Once the chapel was built, and it would have cost quite a lot to build, although it's a small building, they used good quality local dressed stone, and so quite a few people must have put some money into it. And yes, it was well attended, certainly up to the First World War.
My mother, you see, was a great churchwoman. She attended church twice every Sunday. And then in the afternoon, my father used to go to chapel, and he used to take me along with him. Although I was in the choir at the church at the same time, so I spent most of my Sundays in either the church or the chapel. And he used to go there until it closed.
Yes, I think by the late 1970s, there were a few local families keeping it going, but I suppose older people died, and the younger people didn't want to take it on, and so I think it was in the late 1970s it fell out of use, and finally it was closed down and sold off. I think it was in 1984.
But the other thing, of course, most people had open fireplaces, didn't they, with grates and an oven at the side, which were beautiful for roasting things and rice puddings and things like that. But of course you had to keep the fire going. And we had no taps, obviously. You know, it was a well. We didn't even have a pump at our house. We just had a bucket. And we pulled all our water out by that, which was very nice water. But if you wanted a bath, that had to be pulled out, go into the old copper at the back, and the fire lit under that to get the water warm. And then transfer it, get the old bath in front of the fire in the winter, transfer the water through in a bucket, and put that in nice and warm. And you take turns having a bath in front of the fire, which is quite nice, really. And the smaller ones would go first, like. And then, of course, you had the rigmarole of all the water had to be ladled out and put outside again. And we had no drains. It was tipped on the garden, I suppose. And but that was it. You had your bath once a week, you was happy.
Here we have a building which is quite different to the previous one. This building is timber framed and wears its timber framing on the outside. We can see all the evidence. It's a 1.5-story cottage under a thatched roof, very cosy to live in. Let's see what's inside. John, hello, hello. Ah, thank you. Right. Well, here we're coming into quite a different building. Before we were looking at an open hall, or the fragments of it. Here we have a sealed hall. This is a building with a really solid ceiling. It's no longer an open hall. It has its fireplace here. This is part of the original building, and we're not talking about an open hearth burning in the centre of the building. We have this superb beam just here, beautifully chamfered with a run-out stop over here, and this is prepared with a side axe and beautifully done. Over here we have timber framing that is flush with this surface. The heartwood is on this side, the pegging is on this side, and this is because it's looking into the room, it's looking into the most important room of the building. On the other wall at the other end of this room there is also a wall which faces inwards. It has the heartwood on that side, pegging on this side, and it's looking into the most important room. Here we have another room which was the accommodation for whoever lived in the house originally, and at the other end there would be the service accommodation, which would have been the food preparation area. Well, here we are coming up into the attic rooms. Here we have a very low ceiling, which wasn't here originally. It would have been open to the ridge under that very cosy thatched roof. We come through here, we have a very rough timber along here. This is an indication of the fact that these are not public rooms. And we're coming right through the end wall of the building now. We're coming out of the building into a later extension made in the 17th century. And here, this is the original end wall of the building. And here you see carpenter's marks, which are assembly marks used to indicate which bits went where when the building came here as a prefabricated structure. And you can also see pegs here, which are used to hold the building together. Here we have a building which is very well preserved, and unusually so in this village. It hasn't been mauled about, so it's a pleasure to see because everything is in its right place.
Electricity came before my time, before the war, obviously, and made quite a revolution. Other than that, it was candles and oil lamps. And my mother cooked with a Valor stove, I think, 3-burner stove. It was fairly whitish flame, which wasn't very hot. You couldn't do chips and things like that. They just weren't powerful enough.
Another building whose function changed over time still exists in the High Street.
Well, in there, there was a forge in there, and then you took the horses in there because that front was open, and you tied the horse up in what they call a pennies, and it was a cobbled floor, and then he came out of there with hot shoes and shod the horses in there.
Is it push right?
Oh, in the war it was empty, that part, but this part over here was used as for the home guard to sleep in at night when they mounted guards. I slept in there many a night.
And there were people up at the airfield, because of course it was an airfield during the war.
And they used to be going over night and day, and especially just before D-Day, it was a nightmare really to be out. You couldn't talk to anybody because of the noise of these planes, and it never ceased. It was rather remarkable if there, say, a minute occurred when you could talk to somebody because they were continuous.
I remember the airmen coming down from the airfield on their bikes, riding through the ford and falling off because it was very slippy. And some of them used to ride along the parapet of the bridge, which was very dangerous, I should think.
Oh, the Americans tried to get over the bridge with tanks that were too wide to go over the bridge, push the walls out.
Because there wasn't a footpath round the bridge, you see, and they came up round the corner, cut it a bit short and knocked it to blazes.
I was in a field of mine and I was grafting a tree up a ladder, and I saw this plane coming over towing a glider, and it was in difficulties, and it released the glider, and the glider was able to get back to Shobden under its own steam. And but the plane crashed down in front of Burton Court. It went down right by the front door, and my wife happened to be in the Great Hall when she saw the plane pass by the window. And I went to the assistance of the pilot who bailed out, and he came down in a clearing about a quarter mile from my house, and I was able to help him extricate himself out of a lot of bushes he'd landed amongst, so that he didn't get his parachute torn. And as soon as we got out onto the road, a lorry came from Shobden and picked him up and took him back and put him straight in a plane and sent him up again, which I understand they always did. Well, I was woken up one night, and of course I had a rota of places I had to go to because that was all prearranged, and they were all people who hadn't a phone. And I set off round the parish, and I was going towards Monkland, where there was one of our members, and there were the Monkland Home Guard were on the crossroad. And of course it was a moonlight night, most bright night I've ever known in my life. It was like daylight, and they thought the Germans had landed. And these Home Guard on the crossroad saw me coming over the brow of the bank with this motorcycle, and they thought I was a German parachutist that had landed, and they trained all their guns on me, and it's lucky they didn't pull the trigger.
In most communities, there is a continuity about the place of worship. So what about the Plantagenet church? The earliest features are the lancet windows dating to about 1180. Originally 4 windows would have flanked the nave on both sides. Some were replaced in the early 14th century by larger windows.
The chancel also dates to approximately 1330. The original chancel arch would have been very much lower than this present one, which dates to the 1864 alterations. When preparations were being made for that, and they stripped the old plaster away, they found a row of 3 lancet lights, like the early ones in the nave elsewhere, with a small oval window above it, which nobody at that stage had any idea were there.
The east window dates much later, to 1902, and was commissioned to celebrate the safe return of Colonel Clews of Burton Court from the South African War. The same family donated the organ, replacing a much smaller instrument in commemoration of their son, Lieutenant Warren Peter Clews, who was killed in action in France in March 1918. Another important feature is the beautiful and ornate late 15th century screen. In year 2000, the oldest surviving part was extended with this much simpler modern section.
Here we have a building which is somewhat similar to the one we saw before. This is a 1.5-story building, but here the roof has been raised to put in this top row of windows. So this has become a full 2-story building rather than a building with an attic. It's also 2 bays long, so it's a rather short building, and it's had an additional bay added at that end. This is a bit unusual. Normally these buildings have 3 bays, and this may be because it's part of the, may have been part of the church, because it's built in the churchyard. Here we've got the end of the building, the original truss is in place, and the sides of the building have been raised to give a different angle to the roof. And this is to accommodate a higher ceiling on the first floor. Here we have an exposed area of timber framing. We have the jowl post on the corner here, all original components of the building, And just here is the tie beam. This has got a scalloped surface because it's been dressed with a side axe. The best surface is on the other side. And here we have a doorway cut through. This is an interrupted tie beam. The tie beam is linked to a door frame which has been cut through to give access from one room to the other. And we have, even with this additional roof height, we have quite a low ceiling. So here we have very steeply angled saw marks, which are indicative of trestle sawing, and it indicates that this is an early building. Later techniques use much more vertical sawing. And just along here we have carpenter's marks, and these are different to the ones we've seen before. These use a circle and lines. There's a 2 here and a 2 here. The circle indicating the level in the building that they've been put.
If you listened on the railway, you could hear him coming, because he used to come round a sharp bend at the bottom. And when you could hear him coming, you used to say, "Come on, boys." And we used to put the halfpennies on the line, look. And they used to flatten them into pennies. We're naughty boys them days, look. Anyway, it used to work out all right. Yes, there used to be rails across there and a gate, and we used to come through there to come on the platform here. And then back along here used to be the edge of the platform, and it used to be 4 foot down below here used to be the track. And then we used to walk down here, up and down. You could walk anywhere, but you was never allowed to stand on the edge of the platform. And when young boys, we was always frightened of falling on the track. Just behind us now used to be the big sign of Pembridge. And then back across the other side used to be the big signal box. In the corner there used to be the signal box for it all. And the main track used to go all the way down here. And then when they finished, look, going up through, we used to go up onto the platform after, and get round our engine driver. We used to go up from Shanton and get in the train. That's true, that is. Straight getting in the train, and they used to go up and down Shanton. And like naughty boys, like after, we used to go, after the goods train's gone, like, we used to turn around and get the truck side and push down to the bumpers at the other side. We used to get the little levers, and then start one off and then jump in the truck and have a nice little ride out to the bumper. That was naughty boys them days, but they don't do it today, not one bit. But we used to have some fun.
Some examples of a past way of life still remain in the locality. The Great Wheel at Arrow Mill, for example, illustrates what the one at Eardisland must have looked like.
It ceased to go round when the flood blew the mill pool out in about 1947, I think. And then because the river then went across the garden, it wouldn't drive the mill wheel. And it was then left stationary for years. As you see, there's a metal centre to it, which is not authentic. The old one is down there, which was wood. But because it was so old, it got decayed, a certain amount of decay in it. And when it got wet, it got spongy and the wedges squeezed out. It's about 3 tons, we think, the wheel. And it then dropped down, the wedges dropped out, the wheel dropped down, and we were stuck again. And my assessment was that we'd have to put a metal centre in or a new wooden one. And the metal was more accessible. And some other local boys, we had several local people help me with it. But it was a fairly big job to do this current one, where we've got all the new spokes, new pegs and new paddles. Then we've put all the panels in place round, which originally were wattle and daub, and then they were subsequently built as brick. And when I started, half of them were out, fallen out, and the roof was leaking, which has decayed some of the floorboards. And this last project has been to put new floors throughout the first floor. But we've got a lot more to do. I've been working up to my 70th birthday, and I particularly wanted the mill wheel to be turning as it is, thank goodness, at the moment.
At midsummer, it's time to herald the blessing of the river, with a snake of flame, a huge bonfire, and romantic lanterns. Some aspects of this festival embrace the traditions of the Morrismen.
There's a big long one that's my one. Okay. Which one's yours? That's my sister's.
Every Sunday afternoon, especially in the summer, I think most of us would go to the ford, which is by the side of the river. Families would go, we'd have a picnic, and the kids would go in the water, the young ones at the one end, the bigger ones diving at the other end, and it was just a general nice atmosphere, all families talking to each other and enjoying themselves. There was nowhere else to go. You couldn't go much. There were probably no buses much on a Sunday, I don't think, and you had 2 miles to walk to catch a train if you want to go anywhere, so this was it, you go up the river.
Well, we had to make our own enjoyment. We used to go down the ford. Most of the summer we spent down the ford in the river, either swimming if you could, learning to swim if you couldn't. If you didn't swim, you got thrown in until you could swim.
The small holdings used to be, well, 2 as I can remember was on Burton Court Estate before it was sold up. And they were self-sufficient, about 20, 30 acres, few cows, few sheep, and some of them a little bit of corn. But of course it's all gone now.
There is only 2 farmers now left in this village that has got stock. Everyone else has either got potatoes or corn or something, but they've got no stock. And as for a farm worker, well, it would be a job to find one. And I expected there was 50 when I left school.
Although the days of self-sufficiency have gone, and despite the many social changes which have taken place, the village retains a thriving community, with many inhabitants making a living locally, including those involved in maintaining the agricultural traditions of the area.
Well, it's fairly extensive. It's enough for us. It's about 21 acres in all. And it comprises mainly fruit trees, apples, plums. We have a lot of varieties of apples. And then, of course, we have all our soft fruits, and we grow all our vegetables as well. Well, I think it's very important that we try and uphold the old traditions of farming. And I think farming is becoming very, very difficult now in England. And it's good to see the diversification that is taking place in England, but it's not always an easy path. So what we're doing is we're trying to maintain the traditions and then produce value-added products from our root sources, such as jams, chutneys, whole foods, and so on. And we're trying to keep our food wholesome and local. You know, our vegetables travel at the most 50 yards from where they're grown to where they're sold.
The supermarkets have created an artificial demand for produce that are out of season. The consumers want to come and do a lot of their shopping in one stop, and we find that a lot of them go to supermarkets because they can get everything in one go. So what we've done is we've incorporated local dairy and as much local produce as possible.
The thinking consumer now is definitely moving towards food that is good for them. I mean, you are what you eat, let's face it.
There's a tradition in fish carving, which I'm continuing, if you like, in that these trophy fish were carved at the end of the 19th century for wealthy people who could afford to have the work done. That went out of vogue. The wealthy people disappeared after the First World War. Things changed. But now there are 1 or 2 people like myself who have brought that tradition back, if you like, or that skill back, that craft back. And we are making trophy wooden fish pretty well as they would have been done all those years ago. using the same sort of tools, possibly different timbers and different finishes, keeping it more up to date, but the tradition itself is the same as it was 100 years ago. The way I do it is to visualise the finished sculpture, if you like, in my mind before I start actually doing any work, and then literally withdraw it from that piece of timber, take away the spare timber and just be left with what you see in your mind.
Yeah, a lot of the tools are pretty much the same as you would have used several hundred years ago, if not 1,000 years ago. Although we use some machines now to do things quicker, basically the skills are the same.
Yeah, in ceramics as well, the tools are really primitive, just sort of for the shaping, wooden sticks and metal sort of sheets, and the kiln is now electric and programmable.
We both aim at a more contemporary market.
And because I use slab building, that's quite a modern technique as well. Traditional is more coiling or throwing on the wheel.
Yeah, so in a way, I suppose you could say we've both adapted the traditional skills to a more contemporary design. I usually spend quite a lot of time each year. I take time off every year, maybe a month or so, to research a new direction and design.
I just like the making process of it, really, so that's just something that's always been, you know, I just like the hands-on.
Yes.
The fact that I make it, I design it.
Sporting activities have always been important in the village. The first cricket club began in 1866, and football, bowls and tennis have been played on the old meadow that's now used for grazing animals. Nonetheless, it may be a surprise to find that Eardisland has 4 international representatives among a small population of about 500 people.
Basically, being from Eardisland means you're very outdoor, very active. It's not inside staying in an amusement arcade playing computer games. You're outdoor, just outdoor type of person. So playing cricket for the village has really helped. But the briefest summary you can give is you catch the ball, you kick the ball, and you bounce the ball. It's basically played on a cricket pitch, with 4 posts at each end, and the idea is just to kick the ball between the middle 2 posts. Very free running game. It's designed to keep cricketers fit during the winter in Australia. My first cap was in 2000 against Denmark. That was my first cap. That happened. That was a bit of a bad day actually. They gave us a lesson in Aussie rules, but since then the team has gone from strength to strength. We actually beat them 2 years later in the Alliance Cup. Yes, I played in 2002 in Melbourne. It was one of the most defining moments I've ever had. Singing the national anthem in front of 30,000 people, in front of a stadium, it's just one of the best experiences you can ever have. And you come from, say, little Eardisland to be kind of like in the MCG with 100,000 people, you're like, wow, it's a bit of a difference.
Well, my dad's been playing cricket down in the village for the cricket team and in matches, and I've been down to support him since about the age of 5 or 6, and he's been a great influence on me. Well, when they look at you at trials and in matches at international level, it becomes more important to be a good fielder, but really you have to have good hand and eye coordination, and you just have to be able to catch and throw well. And batting is just a bonus. Our first international match was a tournament with Scotland, Wales and the Isle of Man in Birmingham. Our team actually won the whole tournament. I always loved it as a game, never quite knowing that I'd make it to international level.
19.
Is it? Oh, yeah,
I'll
19,
give you the benefit
19.
of the doubt. Okay.
What do you do?
Well, back in the 60s, I was living in Devon, and at a local country club, there was a chap came along who was a wheelchair archer, and he wanted to start an archery group going, and he was the best person to do it because he was an excellent coach,
But moreover, he'd won gold medals for the team archery in the Rome Olympics, so he knew just about everything there was to know about the sport. At that time I was shooting Olympic-style archery, in other words, the composite bows with all the gadgetry stuck on them. And I took to it. I was just lucky. It came naturally to me, and I enjoyed it, got a lot of benefit out of it. Good coordination, preferably right-handed and right eye dominant, or left-handed and left eye dominant, which doesn't always work out. Long levers, rather like rowers, long arms to get a long pull in the arrow, and generally good physical fitness. Longbow shooting is very much more a relaxed form of shooting. People go and they're not really worried too much about scores because the accuracy isn't as good with longbows, but it's very taxing at the same time. You're shooting 100 yards and trying to hit something 4 feet across, and with just a bent bit of wood, it's not that easy. But I enjoy that almost more than the old type.
Well, I should imagine originally it started off horseshoe pitching, and then progressed on to indoors. Obviously you can't throw horseshoes indoors, so it's progressed on to quoits, I should imagine. I've been playing, it's been played, well, as far as I can remember, obviously hundreds of years, I should imagine. And now it's gone to international standing. I played for England myself 5 times. Started off as a B international, and then moved on to an international. It's played mainly on the borders of Herefordshire and Wales.
Bowls, as well as cricket, is a popular summer game for locals of all generations.
Since 1992 I joined the bowling club and I really enjoy it. It's a great sport. It takes my mind off other things. But I'm secretary of it and also fixture secretary. So I got plenty to do.
Toward the end of summer, a new custom brings everyone together and raises funds for local amenities. Along the mill stream, the popular day's racing event gets underway. Eardisland is not caught in a time warp, nor is it a museum. There remains a strong sense of local identity and commitment to this special place, with its ancient history and heritage. New skills are replacing those lost over time, and change has seen the end of the railway line, the horse-drawn plough and the tin bath. Buildings have changed their functions, but Eardisland remains a village with a thriving community, alive to the present, with strong connections to the past.